Rastafari, greetings and love family. We are here in Addis Ababa. You are tuned in right now to the Roots Juice Breakfast program, and I am joined by another two very, very special guests right now, coming all the way from a very special place in the UK, which is Fairfield House, the house of His Imperial Majesty. The second delegation, we can say, of 2023. So I'm here with brother Shawn Naphtali Sobers, who is a professor, a filmmaker, a writer, many more things I'm sure, and a fellow Naphtali as well. And with Rob Mitchell, who is also a producer, a radio host, and many more things that we're going to reason about right now. As well, Dr. Shawn is the director of Footsteps of the Emperor, which is a classic documentary, a crucial documentary for Rastafari students, we can say, and anyone wishing to know more about the story of His Majesty in England. So, already I've kind of introduced us, but maybe I can ask you both to give us a quick little introduction. We're here in Addis, you've been here just over a week. How's the time been? What has brought you to Addis in this time?
Yeah, just say give thanks for meeting the eye. It's a blessing.
Likewise.
Joy. Give thanks for your works. And this is my first time in Addis, and I say that with no shame because I feel that everything comes in its own time. But I've been, consciously trodden in Rastafari path for 33 years. And I started to think, will this ever happen? Do you know what I mean? Because different opportunities that I've had haven't managed to manifest. So I'm just thankful to be here today, because everything in its own time. And it has been a truly blessed visit. It's been only 8 days, it's been very quick, but we've packed so much into this 8 days, do you know what I mean? It feels like a lot longer. So obviously there's much more we could have done, but in terms of how we've used the time, you know what I mean, we've seen a lot, experienced a lot, and it's just a beautiful country. And to see the legacy and the impact of His Majesty, even today we went to meet a friend, and it was at the the Brion Hotel, and that's it's got a swimming pool there that His Majesty built, you know what I mean, and developed, and the first one in Addis, and it's still people enjoying it today. Different, even little things like that where you didn't even go there for that reason. Do you know what I mean? But then His Majesty's legacy still lives on. So no, it's been a joyous visit, really. Yeah, to give thanks.
The footsteps, following the footsteps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Rob, I've just been tagging along.
Okay.
Naphtali, my big brother actually my little brother in age, but big brother in stature since time. When Shawn made that Footsteps in '99, we kind of started a company about the same time called Firstborn. We were looking at Bristol as a UK city and its connection and acknowledgement of its relation to transatlantic slavery. So we started that company then, '99, and we've been on that kind of creative collaborative journey since about that time as well. So when he said he's going to Ethiopia, I'm like, well, yeah, and the invitation was on, absolutely. I didn't know what we were doing here really. The plan was just to come and see what it had to offer, but it has been remarkable. I mean, I've also been involved in Imperial Voice, which Shawn is co-founder with Peter, and I've kind of been involved with managing Mr. Bunny, etc. As you've been a key contributor to that, regular contributor to that. So, and connected through Fairfield House and Pauline, you said the second delegation, Keith and William, etc. So kind of collaborate with these guys around Imperial Voice and House. But I feel definitely more of an observer, come witness. I definitely wouldn't say I follow Rastafari as a kind of liberty, but absolute admirer of the whole journey, the whole liberty, the whole philosophy. And I think as someone with an African diaspora, it's impossible, if you like, to ignore or sort of diminish the value and the impact that Rastafari, Haile Selassie and Ethiopia has, I think, in our consciousness and our sense of being.
And just to say, you asked about the reason for the visit, how it came about. It's all very fast, really. So the prime reason of coming over, and the thing that started it all was a beautiful lady, M.U. Teklemariam, one of our elders in the community, and she is the great-granddaughter of Blaten Geta Heruoy. Blaten Geta Heruoy was the foreign minister for His Majesty, and when they came to Bath, Blaten Geta Heruoy came to live in Bath at Fairfield House as well. So he died in 1938, and was initially buried at Locksbrook Cemetery, which is just down the road from Fairfield House. And the funeral was in the chapel at Fairfield House, and he is buried the next day. His body was exhumed in 1947 and brought back to Addis, but he's never had a funeral. So now, this year, on the 19th of September, was actually the official reburial in a brand new grave. Well, the first grave was for him in Addis at Holy Trinity Cathedral. So when I made Footsteps of the Emperor back in 1999, I read, I was doing lots of research, obviously, and then I read about this man, Blaten Geta Heruoy. It's the first time I heard about him, and then found out he was buried in Bath. I was like, what? Didn't know anything about this. So I found the grave, and the family didn't know the grave was in Bath. So I'm the one who showed, M.U. her great-grandfather's grave, because all they knew was his body was in Holy Trinity. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I was like, no, he's only buried down the road. So I met her at Fairfield House. So, but that was in 2016. And at that point, the grave had all toppled over, do you know what I mean, as happens with old graves. So I then worked with the family to get the grave restored. And, I've continued to do research on Blaten Geta Heruoy ever since, and to hold memorial events for him. On 19th of September, we had an Ethiopian Orthodox service in Bath Abbey, and, other things as well. So as a thank you for my research into and work into Blaten Geta Heruoy, the family invited me over to speak at Holy Trinity Cathedral for this reburial of their ancestor. So that was the first thing, and that was a beautiful, do you know what I mean, gesture on their part. And I thought, I'd love to go. Got to take up this opportunity. It's really near the beginning of teaching. I literally start teaching in 2 days' time when I go back to England. But I thought I can't pass this up. So it kind of mushroomed from there. I started to think, well, while I'm in Addis, I got to make the most of the opportunity. So let me start thinking about making Footsteps of the Emperor too. So that started to mushroom around it, really. Do you know what I mean? And that's when I thought, bring in Rob, do you know what I mean, as a co-filmmaker, and do that. The reality started to kick in that actually you can't just come to Addis and start filming because you get arrested, do you know what I mean? So it's been more of a research trip than a filmmaking trip. We've done lots of phone footage and stuff like that, but definitely, it would take at least 1 or 2 visits to make a film. But the initial, I guess, theme of Footsteps of the Emperor 2 will be to manifest it, but will be about the legacy of His Majesty and that Ethiopian relationship, but how it's manifested back on Ethiopian soil, and then also how it's ricocheted back on UK soil, because the relationship still continues. Do you know what I mean? Since we've been out here, we've seen the story that Prince Amalai's hair's been repatriated back to Ethiopia. So the story is unfolding around us continually. So I'm interested in that back and forward relationship. Do you know what I mean? And Blaten Geta Heruoy is one of the cornerstone of that bigger narrative, really. The Pankhursts are another narrative to dig into. Do you know what I mean? So it's those things, really. So and we could say that's still very much a live thing. But we'll see how it manifests, because I've always resisted wanting to make another film, to be honest. I've done so many other different projects since then, still on His Majesty, the Freedom in the City Festival in 2021. So I see those as my films as well, the part 2s. But with this opportunity, just couldn't say no to it, thinking, okay, got to grasp the nettle. So we'll see where that goes with that film.
Yes, sir. For real. And I remember I see in the documentary the grave that you mentioned. And part 2, I've been saying as well, we need part 2, because even for me, even part 1, I have to give thanks as well for for your words, even to make this documentary, because for myself, one thing I find very unique, and about this documentary is that we have many documentaries where we have Rastaman talking about His Majesty and Jamaican and Menamin. But now in this one we have the ordinary English people of Bath who were just children even in the time, and some of the experiences meeting His Majesty and still today, or in the time they were saying, it's still the biggest experience of their life. They never forget. So it's even very powerful for me when I even first start to research and find out about Rastafari. I thought we have to look far, and then I find out, actually there's a big history here in England.
Absolutely.
And as you say, the connection is ongoing.
Yeah, and to be honest, and you've hit the nail on the head really, that I wanted to capture with Footsteps of the Emperor, that it wasn't a Rastafari film. Do you know what I mean? I'm a Rastafari, but I'm also a filmmaker, journalist, documentary filmmaker. Do you know what I mean? And it was halfway through researching that film, it suddenly dawned on me, I'm doing all this, getting all these stories and about His Majesty. And what if I stumble across something I don't want to hear? Do you know what I mean? Because as a journalist, you do find stories, you know what I mean? But actually, everyone that I spoke to, everything that I read, all the research that I did, everyone had nothing but praise and do you know what I mean? And so I wanted the tone of the film to come through not as a Rasta film, because people would just switch off. Of course they say that about their God and King, do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But so it's much more impartial, I suppose, do you know what I mean? And like you say, you got white English elders talking about Haile Selassie in a way usually you hear Rastafari talking about it, do you know what I mean?
And also it's surprising because to see the reception and the welcoming that His Majesty did receive when he arrived, even before he arrived, everybody was waiting in the train station. I wanted to ask, was there any favorite, while you were researching and finding these testimonies, was there any favorite story that stood out to you?
Yeah, gosh. Yeah, that's a really difficult question because I love them all. Do you know what I mean? I'm just thinking of Arnold Newman when he's talking about just he'd see His Majesty going for a walk while he's waiting for a bus, and he was walking along the river and then he'd bow. This is just a little child, and Mrs. Cribbs as well, just talking about how. To finish the story about Mr. Newman, that His Majesty would bow, then he would bow back, and then just that he just remembers that powerful presence. Do you know what I mean? Of doing this kind of gesture, kind of thing. And he was only about 7 or 8 at the time, but the memory stayed with him. And the same thing about Mrs. Cribb, when she was there when the Emperor came to Bath. And she talks about how the emperor, she didn't know what an emperor was, but it sounded like something out of a storybook, so she was just excited, kind of thing, So there's these little kind of humble nuggets of stories that have stayed with these people to the point where when they saw my advert asking for memories in a newspaper article, what would it have been, 70 years later or something? They were still passionate enough to contact me. They didn't have to contact me, do you know what I mean? And people are still contacting, particularly Ras Benji at Fairfield House today, because we're doing a memories project there now, do you know what I mean? So, I heard one story more recently. It's at a funeral, and I was kind of playing the drums at this funeral. It was during lockdown, and the person doing the funeral was a celebrant, like a secular person running the funeral. And he told me afterwards that he did a funeral where the lady was the nanny of Fairfield House, the head nanny. So it wasn't Ruth Haskins, it was actually the head nanny. And the story that she always told her children and grandchildren was that at one point her own children were at Fairfield House, so she told them off and made them go to bed without any supper. And during the night she heard these kind of footsteps creeping, and she was thinking it was the children. When she opened the door, it was the Emperor with some cookies and milk or something, wanting to give it to her children because they didn't have any supper before they went to bed. Do you know what I mean? And she just remembers the kindness of this man. Do you know what I mean? And even noticing that happened in the household. Do you know what I mean? And she's just like, you know, that's always stayed with her. Like those kind of memories to me are beautiful. That's not documented anywhere. Do you know what I mean? So it is now, I guess.
You say. And obviously you've told us a little bit already. I was going to ask what inspired you to first, come with the idea to get these testimonies that have not been documented, as you say.
Yeah. For me, I was working at a TV station, as Rob said. You know, we started to work together at Black Pyramid Films in Bristol, and I then got a job in HTV studio. So I was actually an employee of the TV station, and I'd made one previous documentary to it in about 1997 about youth homelessness in Bristol. And then when I had the opportunity to pitch my own idea, I was like, well, you know, the Emperor of Ethiopia, used to live in Bath during Mussolini's invasion, etc., etc. You know, no one in the room had ever heard of this story. They're all like the big producers of the TV station. So they're like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. If you go back and do the research and bring it back, we'll give you half an hour of TV time. So I went away, did more research, made a little 5-minute little promo thing. And when they saw the amount of research, they said, well, we'll give you 2 half-an hours rather than 1 hour, rather than 30 minutes, because they could see it was such a big story. Do you know what I mean? Because I just felt, this needs to be told. This is far too magical a story to remain hidden, really. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it was as simple as that. This story's too big to not have been told, really.
It's worth acknowledging as well that HTV was the regional broadcaster, ITV broadcaster, and Bath came under their geographical remit, and so their struggle is constantly trying to find content that's relevant to the region, but also, like you were saying about it being not just about Rasta, had to appeal to everyday regional people. So that had, as a filmmaker, you would have to juggle that thing as well. So in fact, it was a blessing that it was context, because if not, it could have easily fallen into like this the Rasta film or something they say. But as a filmmaker, I guess you have to make sure that it was open to whoever's watching it and feels that it's relevant to the region which Bath was. I guess it's probably quite hard to get, because they would have had lots of Bristol stories every day, because Bristol's a big centre in that region. So it would also been rare to get a really strong Bath story as well.
And as someone who grew up in the city of Bath, you know, there is a large black community there, but it's also very hidden. It's not as visible as it is in Bristol. Do you know what I mean? You know, we and Rob made a film together about the Rainbow Still Band. It's the oldest still band in the country that are in the city of Bath. Do you know what I mean? They come from Barbados, set up their thing, and they still run today. So there's plenty of stories, and this is a big part of what we did at Firstborn Creatives that Rob talked about. Was, you know, people call them untold stories or hidden histories. Do you know what I mean? And I think we've both been involved in that kind of genre of filmmaking, of telling stories that we know other people know, but most of the people don't know. So we use our platform to try to bring them to the light, really. You know?
For real, like. Because yes, so we can mention then about, like you say, some of those other projects that you have both been involved in. As well, like, it ties in with this question I wanted to ask, like, I see an interview recently with Don Letts, I think, and he said something interesting, which was that today, like when we talk about like the identity of what it means to be like British, and he was talking about how much the Caribbean culture, Jamaica and Barbados and these places has influenced, you know, like British culture, since like Windrush generation is now being talked about a lot in UK and everything. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And as you were saying, some of those projects, I think you have highlighted those things.
Well, it's a two-way street, because there wouldn't be a Barbados or a Jamaica without British colonialism, without European colonialism. So whereas and each of those places is a colonial melting pot. So it's, when we talk about decolonisation, I guess, how do you become un-Jamaican? How do you become un-Barbados? So there's all these paradoxes, contradictions, and problems with these ideas when people have pure ideas. Definitely Britain, in the same way that Britain created these colonies. So then Windrush was a key chapter in that colonial story. And the thing is, I think we have to remember is that most of our conversations about British colonialism is only because it's in relatively recent memory. Being in Addis is interesting because just hearing the history of this place is just ridiculous. It goes back so much further. But the whole colonization, recolonization, crossovers, the whole re-demarcation of lines and tribes and peoples and language and states and countries, it's the same. Same everywhere, you know. So I think what is significant about the British story is that it's quite recent. So the reason we talk about people sometimes say, well, you complaining about slavery before everyone was enslaved. Once again, it's quite recent. So we're talking about great-grandparents and that great-great-grandparents.
It feels long ago, but it's not actually.
It's not, but it's really close. But I mean, of course, everyone's ancestors at some point would probably been enslaved. No question about that. But that's the recency is what makes it interesting, I think, in the British stroke African Caribbean-y type thing. And once again, in terms of the melting pot, all of those places, Jamaica, you know, Chinese, Indian, European, you know. So we talk about, So we talk about, so we kind of, each of those places bring, there's no purity of culture there. So even when we talk about, in Bristol, for example, we have this idea about Carnival, which is an annual celebration at the beginning of the summer, which draws from Jamaican incarnation of festival, fest, masquerade. All of those things, not just purely African, but they're European as well. So you look at masquerade and where it's coming from, and there's lots of stories where you hear about people mocking other people and mocking people back, and you know, you get these really strange things. But anyway, the point is, all of these come from fusion and the rest of it. I guess what's interesting is what rises to the top, what stands up, what is the things that survive all of them. And Windrush is one of the chapters in British colonial history, relatively recent, only a generation ago, so that's why we can celebrate the elders now, because they're our grandparents, in our case parents, that generation. So we remember them, we can hear from them, we know how badly they were treated when they arrived here, but also at the same time, to be fair to Britain, it also transformed Britain's consciousness, because the people, when they came here, firstly, with Selassie, for example, I think, as Shawn was saying earlier about the Bath story, one of the reasons Bath is less known is because, as the black community in Bath, because we don't hear about drug busts and we don't hear about whatever the criminal activity that people have been impoverished into, because they're quite stable, nice community, they can do that. So people aren't stereotyped in that way. And with the same thing with, I think, the story of the emperor coming to Bath, what's nice about the story is you hear about a welcome. That's a lovely story to tell. Because we're not hearing about racist white people who rejected, you know what I mean? We hear about a welcome. He's a refugee. You know, the other refugee story in Bristol is about all these Somali people or whoever, Afghans who are cheating the system, and all the benefits cheats the Sun newspaper talk about, Daily Mail. This is a refugee story, but it's not the typical horrible refugee story we hear, or we get pushed on. You know what I mean? So that's what makes that kind of stuff quite interesting. I do think that, so Windrush is, I guess, a recent incarnation of all that fusion, of that history, of that colonialism. So the influence is coming back and forth all of the time. It's in the same way that when the Windrush generation came, of course, there's backlash, because people are like, well, we don't want you here because we can't afford to eat either. We're being impoverished and none of that. And after time, we don't want you marrying our daughters, having, you know what I mean? It's kind of sexual threat and all these kind of stuff that kind of, but after a while, people are people. So people get to know each other. That familiarization changes everything. Literally changes the population, as more people become mixed in their kind of genes or whatever, but also in their culture, because it becomes more understanding. So it's impossible not to be influenced by these things, I think. Anyway, but so it's a kind of a colonial backlash, if you like. So it's impossible for the British culture not to have been changed. Now we have an Indian Prime Minister, do you know what I mean? Because of the kind of economics. So it's interesting economics. I think the economics of the Asian community can be very different to the economics of the Afro-Caribbean community. But so I think Don Letts is right. You know what I mean? It's impossible for these things not to have made a massive thing. And England's a very small country. Tiny country, really. So, and I think that what's worth acknowledging though is Jamaica. Jamaica, I'm not from Jamaica, but I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just another colonial outpost. But the impact of Jamaica, I call it a cultural superpower. It's phenomenal, the impact. But a lot of that has been down to Bob Marley, Rastafari, Marcus Garvey, and just the character of Jamaican people. And the stories that I think that tiny little island in the scheme of things has been able to put out to the world. And a lot of that is down to the emperor and this place.
You say, definitely. And it's all tied in, as you say, and it's interesting because I think like 2 years ago maybe they pulled down the statue in Bristol of the slave master Colston, Edward Colston. So we can see a change in mentality, I guess, with new generations.
Could I talk a little bit about that? I mean, both me and Rob have been involved directly in the Colston narrative and research for the past 20 years. We made the film that kick-started our company in 1999 was called Under the Bridge, and it was about that history. It was about Bristol, legacy of transatlantic slavery, and Colston was very squarely in that documentary. And I've continued, we both have, but even separately, I've continued to research transatlantic slavery legacy in Bristol. Rob's done his own projects around that and making lots of films about it. So a big part of my, in a way, research identity for a lot of people has been in Bristol, it's transatlantic slavery legacy, and in Bath is His Majesty. There is really, I don't want to get into the politics of Ethiopia because I'm not qualified enough to talk about it. But it's a really interesting moment when the Colston statue got pulled down and I got dragged back into that narrative because I'd done so much research about it. So I was on TV and, you know what I mean, all this kind of stuff. But then not long after, the statue of His Majesty was smashed in Wimbledon by Oromo young people. Do you know what I mean? And it was a really weird axis. Do you know what I mean? And which I still this is the first time I'm talking public about that. And there is a contradiction there. Do you know what I mean? Because obviously those young people see that individual, who we know as His Majesty, as a figure of oppression for them. Do you know what I mean? And I can't ignore that. Do you know what I mean? But I know there's obviously, we've got our view, but they've got their view. And as peace-loving people, we have to also respect other people's views, even if you don't agree with them. So how do you reconcile that? So on one hand, I can celebrate Colston being pulled down, but then what do you do with that other side of the flip coin? It's complicated. Do you know what I mean? And two truths, or even more than two truths, can exist at the same time. Do you know what I mean? So, like I say, I don't have any answers for that, but these things are complicated. Do you know what I mean? But so we have to hold these things up into the light. Otherwise, we're never really going to understand the other side, the other point of view. Because unless you do that, you're never going to get peace. Do you know what I mean?
And it's a very
entrenched into those views. Do you know what I mean? So you do have to have difficult conversations if we're really serious about wanting to attain peace. You know?
And it's a very live situation here. What do you call anything? Whose statues are irrelevant? I mean, what street names? Notice when you look at a map of Addis, a lot of Africa is represented, a lot of Europe is represented, and it's like Addis is trying to honour everybody in a way, and also it's going through a whole review of its own story and what's important. But the story is important, and I guess like I was probably saying about the whole colonial thing and the Windrush and the slavery, because it's so recent. This is relatively recent, so unlike we talk about, some people would consider His Majesty as the incarnation of Christ. This recent, very, very, very recent times. Whereas the last incarnation, that a lot of people consider would have been 2,000 years ago, whatever. So there is something really interesting, I think, about the currency of all this. And that is definitely makes you think about, like Shawn was saying, this business about who's honoured and what story is being honoured. And I think what's become apparent to me anyway in this trip is that story is really important. So you go to Fairfield House and you hear Ras Benji give the story, the key points of the story, and you come to Addis continuity and you hear the story continued. You get into a taxi, you talk to a taxi driver, they tell you the same story. You go to a museum and tell you the same story. And that story, those stories are really important. You go to the Unity Museum, the Menelik Palace, whichever one it's called, see the story, legend, story, Queen of Sheba, story. And it shows you how important story is for people's understanding of themselves and people's liberty, really, and aspiration as well, I think. But it's really live here. Names, statues, memories, civic kind of value. Very, very live.
Yeah. It's an interesting time to be alive. Around a lot of things. So I will ask then, I will ask a little bit before we seal up about Ethiopia again, but just before we get to that, maybe are there any other projects that maybe you wanted to mention that are in the works at the moment, or over the years, any like key projects that have kind of stood out?
I guess for me, around this history was in 2021, which was the Freedom in the City Festival. So it's named after the freedom of the city, which His Majesty received. So Freedom of the City is the highest award an individual can be given by a city. And His Majesty was given the Freedom of the City of Bath in 1954. So the festival, it was an 8-month festival called Freedom in the City, and it was, it was a kind of epic in the sense of it was just coming out of lockdown. A lot of it was online, but we held an opera about Solomon and Sheba in the Bath Guildhall. We held an Ethiopian Orthodox service in Bath Abbey. And we had lots of kind of talks and lectures and symposium, Ras Shango, Prince Afsawassan. There's too many things to really mention. It's one of those things, there's so many things to mention, it's kind of gone a bit blank at the moment. But there was so many events, and it was beautiful. It was just, for me, it's one of my proudest kind of achievements in the way it was directing that festival and all the things that happened in there. And they're all captured, they're all being recorded, and they're all still freely accessible online, really. And what that was trying to do was to I guess highlight again, as Rob said, those stories about this relationship between Ethiopia and the city of Bath. Do you know what I mean? They're both and I say, Ethiopia is a country and Bath is a city. So there is a disparity there, but they're both richly historical, spiritual spaces that have got lots of different layers. And, Ras Benji's kind of taken that even a step further with the ancient and modern society that him and Iman and the other brethren are leading. So for me, it's about how, again, to borrow Rob's analogy, but how story can tap into different people for different reasons. One of the things that I've always found inspiring by my research into His Majesty goes back to what we were saying before, that you realise that it's not just His Majesty that is interested and inspired by His Majesty's works. You know what I mean? There's people from all different walks of life. They might be a World War II historian, for example, but there's some stake there that brings them to His Majesty and the Abyssinian campaign as it was back then. Do you know what I mean? Or it might be someone's, grandfather or father who worked in the leather goods. Graham Clark's father worked for leather goods, who made goods for His Majesty when he lived in Bath, and His Majesty repaid that by becoming a lifelong friend, invited him out to Ethiopia. And do you know what I mean? So His Majesty was very serious about friendships and building relationships, and you saw that even in his style of politics, in how he travelled the world and made friends with JFK and this person and that person. At Fairfield House, we've got a letter to Winston Churchill from His Majesty that he wrote in 1940 when Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. He's a diplomat, he's a politician, but he also knows that it's about relationships. Unless you have relationships, then you don't really have anything. Do you know what I mean? And you don't go into these entrenched. So for me, Freedom in the City is the project for me that I really, that really kind of, I guess, did that work that I'm really proud of. In terms of what next, I never know what comes next, and even if you say what you're working on at the moment, my mind goes blank because I don't even know what I'm working on half the time. But I guess, I am excited about the prospect of Footsteps of the Emperor too. I've realised it's going to be a harder work than I originally realised. Do you know what I mean? Just about, like I said earlier, about setting things up in Ethiopia and filming, etc. But But this journey, this trot to Ethiopia this time has kept me inspired, and it's still relevant. The plan that I had for Footsteps of the Emperor 2 is still, hasn't changed really. There's still a film there. Sometimes I do think though, does it need to be a film? I could write a book about it. Do you know what I mean? But would people resonate with a book about it in the same way they did a film? You know what I mean? And I know different people resonate with different media in different ways. Do you know what I mean? But that would be the other way of doing it. Would be to write a book and let it be that type of work rather than a film, which I'm still open to be honest. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. So watch this space on that one.
Yes. And you've recently published. Some books yourself also.
Yeah, I had a book come out earlier this year called Black Everyday Lives, Material, Culture and Narrative. The short title is Things in the House. And that's looking at a kind of an archetypal black British house, 1970s, 80s. And it goes through one room at a time, and it kind of stops at one object at a time. It takes a dive into the object and starts to tell a story about black British history, and it goes back from slavery, pre-slavery, Marcus Garvey, so it's not a memoir. It does draw on my personal experience, but it's much bigger than that, do you know what I mean? So it stops on things like the Dutch pot in the kitchen, and the radiogram in the front room, and the suitcase in the bedroom, and sickle cell medication in the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, all these different, and there's a chapter about white Jesus and the black Jesus, because in my mum's house, my mum and dad's house, there was always a white Jesus in the front room, and my room was directly above, and I had my black Jesus in that room. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of a bit of a dialogue between those different dynamics, really. Do you know what I mean? So I guess going back to your earlier question about these, Don Lett's quote, for me, I've always felt this sounds like as if it's a burden. I don't think of it as a burden, but I do feel a responsibility to use the platform that I have, whatever platform that may be, to tell certain stories that no one else is telling. Do you know what I mean? You kind of get to the point, even with things like Footsteps, to be honest, Footsteps of the Emperor, that I still, at that point anyway, I still consider myself a Ute within Rastafari. And yeah, I've definitely done some things, particularly within the Rastafari community, that I think, actually, am I the right person to do it? Surely there's an elder somewhere that should be doing this more appropriate than me. Then you suddenly realise, hang on, if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it, and people are looking at me to do it because I've got that certain platform. Do you know what I mean? So not only just about Rastafari, but also talking about different aspects of black culture, black British narratives, black British experience. I do, even though sometimes, none of us want to be in a straitjacket in Limited. As creative people, we want to be able to tell stories about anything and not feel limited. And I have done other things that people will probably be surprised about, that I've told stories about, that have got nothing to do with black culture, history at all. Do you know what I mean? And I'm proud of those works same way, because they're all my different babies. Do you know what I mean? But I'm always drawn back to narratives around Africa and African experience, black British history. It's just a part and parcel of the blood that goes through my veins. Do you know what I mean? So I keep gravitating back to that, and I'm joyous for that. I feel it as a privilege, not a burden, really.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and it's important work. Like, so I think you have a website, ShawnSobers.com.
That's right. Yeah.
You can go and check out a lot of the works on there. So just before we seal up, because I know you have to make some movements. You mentioned Rashango there, and it reminded me, I wanted to ask, in the documentary Footsteps, the story is narrated by Benjamin Zephaniah, legendary dub poet, author, activist. How did that connection come about, to have like somebody so revolutionary to tell this revolutionary story? Put it like.
I'll try and keep it short. So while I was in film school, in my second year, I made a film about Rastafari, and it's about an individual. I originally contacted Benjamin Zephaniah for that. He couldn't do it, but he sent me a very gracious letter. So this is in 1995, I think, something like 94. But he made contact, and spent time chatting about it and stuff like that. So I've kind of kept in touch with him ever since. So that when I had an opportunity to make Footsteps, I reached out to him again, and he is very interested to do it. I haven't contacted him about this one, only because it's just happened so fast. I definitely will contact him. Do you know what I mean, about the prospects of? But I'm not putting anything. I'm not behold. You know, I don't have any expectations. Do you know what I mean? But what will be will be. I think there is also, you know, me and Rob have talked about this. Would Footsteps of the Emperor be more maybe focused on the filmmaker coming into the fore as well? Do you know what I mean? Because I am in, you know, a lot of my works semi-autobiographical. As an academic, I do believe that it's important that the academic also lets the reader know that there is an academic attached to this. It's not just this neutral. Do you know what I mean? So a lot of my work has become more semi-autobiographical in some way as I've got older as well. Do you know what I mean? Just in terms of the style as much as anything else. So would Footsteps of the Emperor 2 be more, not about me, but would it include me stepping out from the back of the camera to be in the front? Do you know what I mean? And we have talked a bit about that. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I completely understand the argument for that. But I still like the idea of having like Benjamin or someone to still anchor it, so it's not just a me. I never wanted Footsteps of the Emperor to be a journey film. I went here, I went there. That's just boring. Do you know what I mean? It's got to have narrative, it's got to have scenes, it's got to have a story and a point to it. It's not a travel log. So I've always been very strict that if we were making this film, it's not just about I went to Ethiopia and this is what we saw. Do you know what I mean? It's got to have a tight structure.
Yes, yeah, for real. And one more question about the documentary. I keep asking about it. We have a question. This one is from some of our Ethiopian family.
Right.
You know, there's a famous photograph of His Majesty looking out of the window, I think upstairs, and you've spoken about it, the connections. If we study His Majesty's autobiography, we know that these hills reminded him of like the hills of Hara. Could you tell us quickly a little bit about that connection, that, you know, unexpected connection you can say between, you know, this small...
Well, there's two things there. So absolutely, in His Majesty's autobiography, and it sent a chill down my spine to read it, you know, volume 2 of his biography, which is where he does say, you know, the house was quite chilly, but when you look through the window of his bedroom, it looks like it reminded him of the seat, the hills of Hara, which is where he was governor of at the age of 14. So in Fairfield House today, you can see exactly through that window, and we've got a photograph next to it of those hills in Ethiopia, and they absolutely do look very similar, kind of thing. And it's just those beautiful synergies that, you know, he took the time to write that in his autobiography, which is a small detail, but actually is incredibly important, particularly when you read them today. That, again, that connection. But one thing I want to qualify, that there is a photograph of His Majesty looking out the window, but I argue that photograph's a fake. I'm not someone who believes everything I read and see. Do you know what I mean? And particularly with photography, my main subject I teach is photography. Do you know what I mean? So I can't blindly accept every photograph that I see. And I've seen quite a lot of photographs that are purported to be His Majesty at Fairfield that I do believe are fakes, because the perspectives are all wrong. It just looks photoshopped, it's all flat, the shadows are not there. Do you know what I mean? And I hate to be that person who's like party pooping. No, that's a fake. That's a fake. So sometimes I just have to wait till I'm asked. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't want to be that guy. Because it's not always about the photograph. Because there is a truth there. He did live there. He did look out the window. Do you know what I mean? So there are truths to some of those images. But there's a particular picture of His Majesty looking at the side room. So it's not his bedroom. But when you see the photograph, he's really flat up against the window. He's really tall, and as we know, His Majesty wasn't a tall man. And it just looks wrong as a photograph. And I think we do have to be. It's a bit like quotes, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? That you can see quotes, and sometimes think, did His Majesty really say that? Did that come from somewhere else? You know, it's a bit like every quote. Einstein said everything because every quote's attributed to him. So I think we also have to be very. Cautious and circumspect, and do our own research. I think that's the key thing. It's like, okay, His Majesty, that's a really interesting quote from His Majesty. So let me find out the speech where that came from, and then you extract that quote, stick it in the Google search, and find the bigger quote that comes from, rather than, do you know what I mean? So I'm a believer in that, I guess, that deeper element of research, because it makes us more, I guess, robust with the knowledge that His Majesty's trying to teach us, I suppose. Do you know what I mean? So sorry, that was a bit of an aside,
man,
but I had to.
relevant,
Do you know what I mean? I had to put that in. But yeah, I'm just so thankful that His Majesty wrote that autobiography there, spent his time. Also, his book of speeches. You know I think it might be Wise Mind Productions, I can't remember, but put together his book of speeches. I know there's a number of books of his book of speeches out there. And when I was doing the research for the film about Blaten Geta Heruoy's grave, and then I was looking through the book, and then I can't remember, so long ago now, I can't exactly remember how it happened, but I found his speech that he gave at the graveside in that book, and I'm like, wow, do you know what I mean? So it's in I can't remember what chapter it is now, but there's a chapter where it's got a few speeches that he gave at gravesides, when people have passed, when empressmenen passed, when Rasputin passed, and it's got the speech from Blaten Geta Heruoy in this book, and I'm just like, wow, you know what I mean? And for me, it's joining those dots. And I don't use words like mystical too easy. Do you know what I mean? I guess I'm not one of those people that uses those words too strong. But sometimes you just have to say, give thanks. There's a higher power working here that joining the dots for me to make it quite easy to tell the story. I managed to find the grave. I found the speech that he gave at the graveside is all documented. Do you know what I mean? And you have to give thanks for people that have done that work previously, for then researchers like me to come along and find it and actually be able to draw a line between those dots. And do you know what I mean? So we all work on the shoulders of others, don't we? Do you know what I mean? So I just give thanks for that. And that, I guess, in a way, that's why I'm also passionate about documentation, using the media. There's a quote that says, don't hate the media, become the media. Do you know what I mean? So things like Imperial Voice Radio, or what you're doing with the camera and YouTube, and we have to step into that space. Because if we don't step into it, someone else is going to step into it and not do justice to the narrative, or also it just be a vacuum and these stories remain untold at all. Do you know what I mean? So, because you could be looking around your shoulder going, should I be doing this? But actually, you've got your power, and I don't use the word power lightly, but you've got your platform and power to do what you're doing, and you're using your platform for that mission. Do you know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? God bless your works, because we have to do this. We have that responsibility. Do you know what I mean? So, that's up.
You say give thanks, likewise, and that a good thing to seal up on. Then you mentioned Imperial Voice Radio. Could you tell us about Fairfield House today? Is not only the radio, many things are happening there. There's multiple communities working together to keep the house secure, and the movie shows us about the deed of gift and these things. So could you tell us a little bit about Imperial Voice and Fairfield House today?
I mean, with Imperial Voice, so Peter Green, one of the workers at Fairfield House, that idea for a radio station has been knocking around for years, and it raised back up. Peter Green is a sound man in the city of Bath, came very inspired with this renewed idea about a radio station, and I was doing a research project that was with Fairfield House, so I had funding. So I was like, let's do it, let's make it happen. Do you know what I mean? So we had the money to buy the kit, marketing, logo, all that kind of stuff, and then bringing in Rob, bringing in Mr. Bunny. We had Prinny, Princess Black in as a management for a while as well. Pauline is now management as well. And it's just been a blessing and a joy. I'm fully aware though that IVR needs a bit more infrastructure. You know what I mean? There's more places it can go. Do you know what I mean? We're working with other radio stations to try to get on DAB, digital. There's more. Running a radio station is a relentless task, because radio is a hungry medium. Do you know what I mean? I've had to step out this year because I had some health problems. So God bless Mr. Bunny and Rob for keeping it going, and Pauline. But yeah, there's big aspirations for IVR, so just give thanks again to you and the other presenters that have kept the media going in there. But yeah, definitely look forward to that next levels for it, really. In terms of Fairfield House in general, yeah, I mean, I think there's more activity happening at Fairfield House now than ever before. We've got the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. They're more regularly involved now, more than they ever have done before. They did a Mescal celebration today, fused with New Year, so they did it today. And yeah, we've got, I don't know, so many different activities there. Then the museum, we're going towards accreditation to become an official museum. Benji does his tours every Sunday, and they're remarkable, really got it down to a fine art. So yeah, I think Fairfield House is in a healthy space. We're working with the council a lot stronger now as well, and they fully understand the mission of Fairfield House and why they can't get rid of it. So that's much more of a partnership as well. So I don't know if you want to say...
God bless Pauline.
Yeah, God bless Pauline, absolutely. But also we're conscious that we can't put everything on Pauline, because she's also overworked, and you know what I mean? We're all feeling the pressure, because it's a hungry place. Fairfield House is a hungry place. And there's lots of responsibility, do you know what I mean? So new people coming in. I have to be honest, when Benji came in to Fairfield House, it took a lot of the pressure off me, because I was fulfilling lots of those roles, and the historian and this, that and the other. And Benji's coming with a renewed energy, and I'm an old man, so I can't sustain that energy anymore. Do you know what I mean? So he's passing the baton on, do you know what I mean? So got to give thanks for that as well. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure Benji recognises that and won't mind me saying that. Do you know what I mean? Because yeah, definitely. But you got thoughts about IVR as well?
Lots of potential. I love what was achieved in the first couple of years. Like you said, infrastructure is important to build on that and keep people, volunteers like yourself. I mean, you guys, you and people who create content. Mr. Bunny is really what makes the station. So thank you, God bless, and
thanks for providing the platform.
Yeah, it's beautiful, because I think that, and it's amazing. I think that your commitment and other presenters' commitment and passion and belief is what gives it a really special place in the world. And I mean, it's called, we talk about broadcasting goodness to the world, and it does feel like it has a unique place in the world. But it's not like a reggae station per se or anything like that. It's definitely about the message, the majesty, and trying to broadcast goodness, the love in that intent. So that's a special place. And like Shawn said, the Fairfield House connection is, I guess it's extending that freedom in the city narrative, and it's even as it stands, even there's a lot of repeat content, because any streaming broadcasting service is hungry. But even when you come back to some of that repeat content, you feel how rich it is. There's a great body of work that's been developed, and God willing, we'll be able to build on that body of work, refresh it. But a lot, and like Mr. Bunny as well, for holding that together, for sure. From that kind of back end, it's been amazing. There's a beautiful body of work, and God willing, we can build on it.
Give thanks. Any last message for the Ethiopian audience, or for obviously that as a teacher for the youths? Any last message to share?
Just learning from history. I think history is a beautiful thing, but we also have to be honest about history and the complexities of history. So we're all students of history. Every subject you can think of has got a historical context to it, really. And we are inspired by the works of His Majesty and empressmenen, and it's got so many different facets to tell and to teach that we're still learning from today. It's a narrative that just goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But I don't want to sound too evangelical about that, because people have to make up their own minds. I'm not here to preach and to tell people what to think and what to believe. But I guess it's just for each person to become their own historian, find out the truth for themselves and find out the path for themselves. And I think the key thing is to then live and let live other people that are on different trolls. Do you know what I mean? And for me, that's the key thing. When you're secure about your identity, about your faith, about your, whatever iterations of identity it is, if we're secure about that, then why should I be threatened by what a next person's doing if it's different to mine? Do you know what I mean? You know, me and Rob have been friends and colleagues since 1995. You know, we don't all share the same worldview about things, but we completely respect each other, and we're brothers. Do you know what I mean? It's like, why should I expect him to think like I do and vice versa? Do you know what I mean? So for me, it's not about that. It's about just do your own research, find your path, and then allow the next person to do the same and live accordingly.
You see.
Yeah, don't be fooled. I think for young people in Ethiopia, certainly, Ethiopia is a construct, just like everything else is a construct. If you create this nation, create that nation, it's all a construct. None of it's pure, none of it's true, except what you create. And I think better together, stronger together. As the diaspora, people look to Ethiopia, people look to Africa and have these idealist, romantic notions of unity and stuff. One of the things I always say, people look at me funny and say, there's no blacks in Africa. And that's, coming here, that's even stronger, in my opinion. There's no blacks in Africa.
What does that mean? What do you mean?
Well, it means because in England, we identify people, that person's racist because the black person's been put down there, whatever. But when, as humans, we find new divisions. So everyone's the same colour or maybe slightly different colours, but then you find other things, the language group, the history, the land, something else to make divisions about. So what I'm saying is, stronger together. When we construct, we might say this history is not true, that's not true. History is what you make it. What we can construct. So I think Ethiopia is stronger together because you can easily start breaking things up and say, these are us and this is mine, but that's foolish. Because actually all these forces are coming from outside, people get put down. Now if you start saying, this is my region, that's my region, that's my region, or creating new regions, then you can't even send a letter to one place to another. I mean, without a good postal service is a metaphor for unity, the ability to communicate a message, then you've got nothing. So actually, stronger together is what I say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, if you think about Africa, the Berlin Conference carved up Africa with rulers and things like that, And one of the things that makes African culture rich is the diversity of what we call tribes and communities, but it's also the things that are being used to separate, divide and conquer, and too much tribalism is getting people nowhere.
Easy to destroy. It's very hard to construct. You could just come in and put a match or put a bomb on something, blow it up in a second. How long does it take to construct something? And then you've got chaos very quickly, very easily.
Stronger together, absolutely.
You see. Definitely. So, give much thanks. I'm sure there's more things we could reason, but time is running. So whether it be in Fairfield or on your next visit, I'm sure we'll meet again. We'll quickly plug this book, Imperial Exile.
Keith Barrows.
People should go and check it out as well. Footsteps of the Emperor. Check out the documentary. We have an interview with Brother Keith as well.
Yeah, it's true.
So likewise, as you say, we give thanks for the works and the inspiration, because without ones having already done certain works, we as younger ones, we feel inspired,
So give thanks for yours as well.
Yes,
bless it. Give thanks.
So Rastafari, give much thanks, and give thanks for the reasoning and the time, and until we meet again.
Absolutely. Looking forward.
Rastafari.
Blessed love.
We're beyond your flesh. We're beyond your blood cells. We're beyond what earthbound eyes can see. There's no need to test. There's no need to guess. We are more than what we seem to be.
I went down there at the auction to really try and get them for my position. But as I know, it was not for me at that moment. Some other people buy it and gone. Nevertheless, cut the story short. 2 weeks after, I wife, get a call to say Ras Bandele must come and pick up the walking stick. So I have 1 year now. See the number 123. But this one is His Majesty personal walking stick. Right here in Barton, walking up miles with it, I mean, when I touch it, I feel strong, Feel very strong, Very strong. Very strong. Sometimes too emotional still, Anything of His Majesty, man.
When he returned to Ethiopia, yes, he named a palace, a house, Fairfield, for the fond memories that it had in that time when he needed support of the world. And I suppose he returned and named a palace Fairfield. And there is lots of things that he renamed in respects to Bath in Ethiopia. So Fairfield is one thing, and he also named many churches when he returned in respect to his love of Bath.
Deciding to make our residences at Bath, we bought a house called Fairfield, and with renewed vigour continued our struggle.